Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to jump right in and uncover those invisible threads of international trade that connect our everyday lives to the massive and, frankly, super complex global economy.
Seriously, take a quick look at the tags on your shoes right now. If you're rocking a pair of Nikes or Timberlands, chances are they were manufactured overseas. Or hey, think about that music app on your phone. If you're streaming on Spotify, you're actually tapping into a Swedish enterprise. So without even trying, you're already a global business customer.
And on the flip side, if you were to take a stroll down Orchard Road in Singapore, you'd see familiar American brands like Starbucks and Ralph Lauren sitting right next to local mom-and-pop shops and Japanese department stores. It just perfectly proves that globalization is a very busy two-way street.
So here's our roadmap for today's Explainer. We'll start with the global consumer, move on to why nations trade, then reaching global markets, the cultural environment, and finally, we'll wrap up with trade controls and alliances.
Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, the global consumer, or the world in your shopping cart.
We're starting right at the micro level, where simple everyday actions, like grabbing your morning latte or driving to work, tie us directly to highly interconnected international markets. Get this, the total value of worldwide trade in merchandise and commercial services, it is staggering $17.5 trillion in 2020. That number is just mind-blowing. And that monetary value has completely skyrocketed thanks to globalization and tech advances, literally pulling virtually every single nation into the fold.
Moving right along to Section 2, why nations trade beyond the borders.
Seeing massive numbers like that kind of begs a simple question, right? Why don't countries like the US just make everything themselves? Well, the answer boils down to how efficiently resources are used. Now, absolute advantage means a nation is the absolute only source or the most efficient producer of a good. But honestly, that's incredibly rare nowadays. So the really crucial point here is that nations actually trade based on comparative advantage. This just means producing at a lower opportunity cost. A country specializes in what they do best, like software engineering in India or luxury fashion in France, and then they trade for everything else. They basically sacrifice the production of one thing to totally excel in another.
And all of that trading plays out directly on a national balance sheet, leading to a widening gap in the United States' balance of payments and its trade deficit over time. Simply put, the U.S. runs a trade deficit because it enthusiastically buys way more imported goods than it sells overseas. Because of higher income levels domestically, we just consume a lot, and that creates this ongoing gap between the money flowing out to buy imports and the cash flowing in from exports.
Which brings us to Section 3, reaching global markets, how companies leap across borders. Companies step up their global commitment through a sort of spectrum of risk and control. They usually start safe, with low-risk importing and exporting. If they want to scale up faster, they might move into licensing, like, say, letting a Japanese company manufacture and sell your special coffee-flavored popcorn for a royalty fee. Then we have joint ventures, where companies actually pool their resources together. And finally, all the way on the other end, we have high-risk foreign direct investment, or FDI. This involves formally establishing business operations on foreign soil, like literally building a brand new factory overseas.
Now, there is a pretty stark contrast in hourly wages between the US and India. For example, an IT analyst in the US might pull in over $31 an hour, while the equivalent role in India pays under $3. This perfectly explains why companies turn to international contract manufacturing and outsourcing to bring down domestic labor costs. Modern information technology allows businesses to seamlessly shift services and manufacturing to pools of relatively inexpensive yet highly skilled labor.
Of course, this massive global reach by multinational corporations, or MNCs, sparks some seriously intense debate, and views are deeply polarized. On one hand, critics strongly point out job losses in home countries, the exploitation of workers in developing nations, and irreversible environmental harm caused by rapid industrialization. But on the flip side, defenders argue that MNCs rapidly raise global living standards, decrease infant mortality, and really boost cross-cultural understanding by providing cheaper goods and creating local jobs. We're definitely not taking sides here, but it's absolutely essential to understand that globalization has both vocal critics and ardent champions.
All right, let's shift gears to Section 4, the cultural environment, navigating human behavior. Because doing business globally isn't just about spreadsheets and logistics, right? It relies heavily on navigating culture and communication. Differences in punctuality, sociability, and directness can literally make or break a deal. For instance, while Americans might rush to start a meeting strictly on time and get straight to business because, time is money, Many Latin American or Middle Eastern cultures expect some idle chit-chat first. Asking about someone's health isn't a distraction for them. It's a matter of basic politeness and hospitality. Furthermore, a Japanese counterpart might use vague language to avoid saying no directly, just to save face, which an American business person might completely misinterpret.
So, a really crucial takeaway here is that cultural differences absolutely bleed into legal norms, which create some pretty complex regulatory environments. Take the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, for example. This U.S. law strictly prohibits the distribution of bribes in overseas business. What this means is that American companies have to strictly adhere to this law, even if kickbacks or bribery are just considered business as usual in the country they're operating in. It essentially forces a collision between domestic legal standards and foreign cultural realities.
Let's head into our final part, Section 5, Trade Controls and Alliances, the Macro Friction and Grease.
At the macro level, governments use different policies to either slow down or speed up global trade. Sometimes they apply friction using protectionist trade controls to shield their local industries. Tariffs are basically taxes on imports, which makes them more expensive. Quotas put a hard limit on the quantity of goods imported, while embargoes are just outright bans. Then you have subsidies, which is financial help given to domestic producers, like U.S. farmers or steelmakers, so they can afford to lower their prices. While governments use these tools to protect domestic jobs from dumping or cheaper foreign competition, most economists will argue that this kind of protectionism actually restricts a truly free, efficient world market.
But what about the grease for international trade? Well, the ultimate grease comes in the form of massive trading blocs. The European Union, for example, completely removed internal trade barriers across more than 24 member countries, effectively creating an economic superpower. It allows goods, services, and even people to cross borders with incredible freedom.
But it's important to note there's a pretty stark contrast between different types of these trading blocs. The EU goes way beyond just trade. It binds its members politically, requires them to follow common rules, and mostly shares a single currency, the euro. On the other hand, the USMCA, which is the agreement between the US, Mexico, and Canada that replaced NAFTA, is purely a free trade agreement. It opens up borders for North American trade to drive robust economic growth, but it does the whole shebang without the deep political integration or the shared currency of the EU. And that brings us to a final provocative thought to wrap up today's explainer. As nations continue to group together into these massive, powerful regional blocs like the EU and USMCA, we really have to ask ourselves, are we actually paving the way for unrestricted global prosperity and a truly borderless economy? Or, by giving preferential treatment only to member nations, are we simply building bigger, more isolated economic fortresses? It's a massive question and one that's going to define the future of global business. Thanks so much for learning with me today, and I really hope this explainer gave you a powerful new lens to view the world through.